Welcome into the Circa Survivor show for NFL Week 3. I'm Spencer with Pool Genius, joined by our lead analyst, Jason Lisk, and we're going to break down this NFL Survivor slate for the Circa Survivor contest, which it's been, I don't want to say there's been inactivity because there's been a lot of activity going on. There's been a lot of sweats going on in this contest, and we've been a part of that with our entries along the way, along the first 2 weeks as well. But as far as eliminations go, not much really going on. So is this the week? Is week 3 where we're finally going to start seeing a couple of those upsets, Jason? What's your general take on the state of the contest after 2 weeks and then what it's going to look like moving forward?
Yeah, and first of all, if you've enjoyed our episodes up until now and you enjoy this week 3 breakdown, we're gonna go in depth on week 3. I promise you. Hit that like and subscribe button. Let us know. Give us some comments. Let us know what you like to hear. And also, I do write an article that will be out, and we'll go into even more detail. We'll have tables and some more stuff. It'll cover a lot of the same things we talk about here, but it'll have a little more detail. So look that up if you want even more info. So week 3, you ask, are we going to get upsets? I mean, you would think at some point, it's been so up and down. Like last year was such a crazy start, but then you had that stretch in the middle of the season last year where there weren't any. Like there was a stretch, I think roughly maybe week 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, where there may have been one particular wipeout, and other than that, pretty much everybody that you picked got through, and the contest didn't get chopped very much more until the Washington game in week 12, and then they got chopped with the Colts late with that week 17 game. So we had long stretches last year, and I think you even posted something about how favorites have done. It's been a persistent theme for most of the last calendar year after that crazy start. But you would think, man, it's not like these games have been sweat free, as you pointed out. So we're really just a few plays away from being a vastly different start to the season.
Yeah, and the biggest one that comes to mind is Dallas
Oh,
last week in the overtime matchup against the Giants. Giants really lost that one. I mean, Dallas had to make the plays, Aubrey had to make the kicks, but man, the Giants just they had those opportunities. They were abysmal in the red zone. Russ did make some throws to neighbors, but made that costly interception late that gave the Cowboys a chance. That could have been the tie. It should have been tie or, um a loss for the Cowboys. I mean, the Giants had the ball late in overtime. If they just manage that better and don't turn it over, there go those entries. But and we didn't have Dallas, so
yeah.
I was rooting against that game so much to the point when it was over, I thought my entries had lost when really it was like I was rooting so hard for some chaos, some carnage to happen that I got caught up in it, and what I was like, "Oh, we actually didn't have any entries riding on this," but,
Yeah,
that's
but we did, but in these contests, you do have certainly equity riding on it,
for
right?
sure, yeah,
Um,
but it felt
I
like a
know
loss to me
it
still.
did. So I know a lot of our listeners probably took Dallas, right? And we talked about in both the article and the video last week, there was certainly a reasonable case to take Dallas. We just thought the risk was there. And once we were projecting close to 20% Dallas picks on a team not favored by a touchdown, once we got that high, it just felt like one of those plays to try to take a shot. And so we sprinkled across some other picks. We had more Lions. We had 3 more on the Cardinals, and then we had a couple Ravens and a couple Rams. And so we did get through with 10. Those 10 may be a little relatively worse off than if you'd gotten through with Dallas, and that's both the fun and the thing about Survivor, right? I would love to have Dallas on some of those entries now. Then I would have the Rams back, the Lions back. Took our shot, and it was not a wipeout week. And so that happens. And if you got through with Dallas, congratulations, because again, it was a justifiable pick on future value grounds. And we're going to talk about, I think, a similar situation this year, but one or this week, but one that's even more on steroids and brings up a lot of these strategy points as we get into it.
Yeah, so that's a great way to set the table, Jason, and I think the best way to start this week, we're recording it here Wednesday night. And the Thursday night football game is very much in play this week. So you're going to have to get that pick in early if you want to take the Miami Dolphins. Just
True.
kidding. You
Yeah.
probably want to take the Buffalo Bills favored by 11.5 points at home against the maddening Miami Dolphins. I don't even know what's going on anymore. Their coach doesn't care. Their quarterback doesn't seem like he cares. We know Tyreek Hill doesn't care. He told us in basically that much in the offseason. So you have the Bills as a massive favorite. Uh, and they're going to be somewhat popular. I don't know. We saw the Ravens. We thought the Ravens were going to be really, really popular last week. They came in number 2 in the popularity rankings, which was a little bit of a surprise to see Arizona go above them. Uh, I don't know. Where do you put Buffalo? How popular do you think that they're gonna be? And would you take them in a portfolio? If so, how much? Would you dabble in them? I know they have a ton of future value. They are our number 1 team, ranked in future value. They set up even better next week. We can talk about all that, but, like, how are you looking at Buffalo, whether
Yeah.
you have a single entry or a portfolio?
Yeah. I think there's Buffalo now ranks second in our future value rankings. The reason they're not first like they were last week is because this game is now the present and not the future. So this was one of the games we would have pointed to as a as a potential use spot. And now with this one out, they drop a little below Baltimore, but they're still up there. Um, I think there are several things. I'm currently projecting it at 16% as we record this. We'll be somewhere around that. I don't think I'm gonna make any drastic change to that. They're closer to 26% in our public pick data. They're above that in, say, some softer pools and smaller pools. But I think in this format, they're gonna be down because there's more people that are aware of the NFL schedule in Circa and are planning ahead a little bit. Even if they're not planning 10 weeks ahead, they're planning certainly by looking at next week's schedule. They play the Saints at home. It is not on Thursday. I think that could impact slightly how people pick here, like having to put your pick in on Thursday. There will just be some people that don't get around to it till Friday or Saturday, and so Buffalo's off the table, even if they would have thought about it. So I think that drives the number in this contest down a little bit too, and having to just split your picks and put picks in at different deadlines. And so, uh, we're going 16%. I think they'll be in that range. Should you take them? I think they're a decent play. Uh, but if you've checked out our tools, you can run actual entries, specific pick combos, and see how Buffalo compares to some of these other picks by running our season planner and optimal path tools. Here's what I would say. It may depend on who you've used, and it may depend on how you want to play out the next few weeks, because Buffalo's future value is going to go from second and probably outside the top 4 by the end of week 5. Most people, I would say the vast majority of the pool will use them in one of these 3 spots. And then they have certainly some low owned, high, reasonably high win odds, good EV spots later if you can save them. But I think it also makes sense because we've drawn the chess analogy before, right? So Buffalo's biggest spots are right now in the next few weeks by win odds. Their relatively easiest part of their fairly manageable schedule is now. Whereas you have like KC with 2 holidays, Detroit with 2 holidays, San Francisco not at full strength, but good matchups late. Tampa Bay with some good spots late. Green Bay's kind of spread throughout the year. And so Buffalo is almost a pick you make at some point. You got to figure out where you want to make that pick in the next few weeks to then advance your entry so you use one of these other teams down the road instead. And that's how I would think about it. Like, which week do I want to employ them? Like, if I've used Arizona, which we have in a lot of entries, look at that week 5 slate if you're following along and you can pull up our season planner. Look at
Yep,
that week 5 slate,
I got it.
and you've got
We got Buffalo.
Buffalo up top against New England,
Yep,
top
81.
top top team. They're the top win odds the next 3 weeks in our projections, and I think that's what the spreads will show. We're not that far out. We're 2 weeks from all these games happening. We've already got look ahead lines for next week, so our 89% on that's based on the look ahead line for the Saints game, and they're top. Second is Baltimore, who people are going to want to save and probably not use against Houston relative to, say, using them against the Bears around Thanksgiving or against the Jets at home
Mm-hmm.
or against the Patriots at home late in the year,
Absolutely.
right? And so I don't think Baltimore's going to be very popular in week 5. Buffalo's the top team, and then you got the Arizona Cardinals. And then it drops off pretty far, right?
Yeah.
After Arizona, who's going to want to use Philly at 66% or so against Denver at home?
Yeah,
And then
in
down
in
to the
this
Colts, the Vikings, teams that are gonna be favored by, like, 4 points. And
yeah,
so, you're gonna get if you don't have Arizona available, you either learn to speak Colts or Vikings, or you save the Bills for that spot.
well,
So,
this is
that's how you
one that's week 5. We had it looked like the most ripe for the picking spot for the Minnesota Vikings playing in London against the Cleveland Browns. Cleveland Browns have not been good. Defense is fine. Offense is I mean, it's a matter of how long are they gonna keep Joe Flacco in there? Are they gonna give these young guys a try? Minnesota has all sorts of problems right now, and I don't think they're gonna be rectified by week 5 when that happens. Carson Wentz will likely still be that quarterback there. So they're not a slam dunk that like we thought they were at the beginning of the season, so that kinda changes your strategy a little bit if you want to hold on to Buffalo for that week or use them week 4 against New Orleans. So it's all gonna be contingent upon how popular are they this week? How popular are they in week 4? But these are the kind of look ahead things that you need to
yeah,
decide.
you have to plan out how you're gonna employ your pieces. So, I would say, as I think about it, and we haven't decided where we're gonna put our specific entries, I am gonna be way less inclined to put Buffalo now on a Thursday before I see week 4 and heading into week 5 on an entry that has used Arizona. Because maybe the Colts are in play that week, but maybe I wanna see one more week to see if they really are gonna finish as a -4, if that line's gonna go down. Because if that line goes down, man, there be maybe no options. You may be on a 3-point favorite if you don't have Arizona or Buffalo, or you have to use Baltimore in, I think, a non-ideal spot, or you have to use Philly in a non-ideal spot, which I don't think you wanna do. So, that's kinda how I'm thinking about it. If there's an entry that has Arizona available, I'm more likely to consider Buffalo in this spot as a leverage play and to save the teams that I might otherwise have to pick.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to think about it. Um, and so we mentioned the Buffalo Bills, likely our second most popular team projected in Circa Survivor. Let's talk about number 1 on the list, and it's number 1 by probably a decent margin.
Yep.
We haven't listed our final projections yet, for Circa Survivor. You can head over to poolgenius.com, click on the Circa Survivor tab, go to our data grid and find all of that, projected popularity, spread, market odds, our odds, win odds that we put in there, and the projected EV based off of those popularity assessments. So the number 1 team in popularity, no surprise, Seattle Seahawks at home against the New Orleans Saints, who the Saints, we had them rated in the absolute bottom of our power rankings going into the season. Nothing has changed on that front. Although I will say, I think Spencer Radler is a little bit better than maybe what we forecasted at the beginning of the season. That's not saying a ton, and I don't think that's saying he's like someone to dread moving forward. You're worried he's going to knock out your entries. But the Seahawks are 7.5 point favorites at home against the Saints. And really, if we go back to the season grid here again, this is the only spot to use them unless injuries come up, unless things happen that we can't foresee that far in the future. We give them 75% win odds here on week 3. Their next best is 61% win odds, is what we're forecasting week 12 at Tennessee. And then everything else is about 55 or lower. So, like, I mean, you don't wanna say, "Is this a use it or lose it situation?" We kinda called that out with Dallas last week, but is this a use it or lose it situation with Seattle as far as we can see?
Yeah, I mean, there may be a situation that pops up, right? Seattle's a little better than we think. Indianapolis, maybe they regress when they host them. When Seattle hosts Indy, and we're currently under 60, but maybe things change and that's at 64, 65. I don't think you're going to catch a 75% plus touchdown favorite like this unless there's a notable injury to a quarterback. And I'm trying to think who that would be. It would have to be almost like some of these people they're favored over. The quarterback injuries might not move lines as nearly as much, so it maybe have to be a surprise. So as you think about it with Seattle, this is definitely a spot that is kind of standalone, one of a kind for them. And so the question is how many people will take them. We're currently in the upper 30s, and I may bump this up. Honestly, I'm continuing to look into it. I think they're going to be very popular, and the question is just how much, right? Because I think they make sense for this contest, right? And when something makes sense for this contest, it's going to get steamed up. And the reason it makes sense for this contest is, unlike pretty much every other team on the slate this week, we'll get to the one exception, I think, down below, but in a little toward the end of the show. But unlike everybody else, they don't have future value. It's a speculative maybe in the future, and probably just as like a 4-point favorite or something like that. So where if you got them, maybe you use them late in a spot that pops up, but it's not like a slam dunk. I must save it. If you run our season planner max survival on our tools with nearly any entry, doesn't matter which two you start with, it's going to give you Seattle as the max survival path. And that makes sense because if you can use Seattle at similar win odds to, say, Green Bay or Tampa or Kansas City, maybe even better, then you still have those teams to use in a better spot in the future. Of course, your odds to survive the season if they win are going to be significantly better. Even with Buffalo, because Buffalo is so valuable in so many other spots and will be an 89% next week. So if you can save Seattle and use Buffalo in 4 or 5, you're better. You're better off. So from a pure, what are my chances to get to the end of this contest, as minuscule as they are, which move makes it better? It's picking Seattle. But then it becomes, how comfortable are you picking a team that's going to get steamed up when we don't know how high that steam will rise? That's what you have to weigh, I think, as you think about Seattle. How much do I want on them? Do I want to be completely off of them in case there's an upset? Because if you're completely off of them and they advance, you can only take so many shots in this contest, right? We took a shot to stay off Dallas. How many of these can you take? So in the article, I will go through and list some of the other potential plays. Because as I view this season right now, I think there are 13 almost slam dunk. You're going to pick that team at some point this year. And then the last 7 to get to 20-0 are kind of a squishy, where do I mix and match? And Arizona's already in that mix. If you used Arizona, if you got through with Jacksonville, if you got through with Dallas, they're in that mix. And we'll talk about some of the other teams, but Seattle is definitely in that mix and one of the highest win odds teams like that you're going to run into all year, I think.
Yeah, and I'm definitely going to link that article in the description below so you guys can view it, get access to it. Of course, we are running a free 3-day trial right there on poolgenius.com on the homepage. I will link that in the description below as well. But let's go ahead, since you mentioned it. I am going to pull up the future value column on our Circa Survivor data grid here. And you can see all these teams ranked by their future value. And you said, yeah, we're going to have to pick 20 of them in Circa Survivor. So you can just go through and look, okay, the line right up to Washington. So we got Rams, Falcons, and Commanders is right about that line. That's 13 teams above that. And you feel good about taking those 13 teams. And then you have the rest of the 7. We got to mix and match those somewhere if you're going to go 20-0, which you will have to do to win this contest. We've established that, especially after the start we've got on. But looking down, Seattle is in there. Definitely, you can see Dallas in there. You can see Jacksonville down in there. The Bengals. These are some teams that people have already picked. So you're feeling pretty good about getting those picks under your belt early in the season so you can get some leverage later. Arizona is also down there. And then we have that dark cloud in the bottom that, oh, I don't even wanna look there. It's the Panthers, it's the Dolphins. Hey,
Yeah.
maybe something can change, but,
There
like, at
there
this
may be
point
a Dolphin spot, by the way. See, so
don't
if
even
you don't
I
use a team like Seattle, you're thinking of, "Well, maybe I'll hit them when they're not popular on, like, a Dolphins pick when they play somebody like."
after
Oh,
Mike McDaniel gets fired and they
when
have
the Dolphins host the Saints late in the year, maybe you're
enough.
like, "I'll roll with the Dolphins instead at lower ownership." So those are the types of decisions. Yeah, you just mentioned it. I'll make you feel even sicker. Inside our 20, our cut line for the top 20 is right now, I think, right around, let me count down, right between, like, Pittsburgh and Indianapolis and Dallas and Jacksonville. And just above Pittsburgh, by the way, is that team we just saw get a 50 burger laid on them,
Yep,
the Chicago Bears.
I saw that.
So the Chicago Bears are inside our top 20, meaning there's at least it's in play that you're gonna have to pick the Bears, you're gonna have to pick the Steelers, you're gonna have to pick the Colts. If you've used the Jags and the Cardinals and the Cowboys, well, that maybe means you don't have to use one of those teams or two of those teams, right? I don't have to use the Bears because I used them. But that's really what you should be thinking, and that's what you should be thinking as you weigh Seattle this week, and you can look at the table I provide. Where do I wanna take my shots? Where am I gonna take these teams in nearly a third of the weeks of this contest?
Okay, so since we're talking about that, I wanna ask you a question. And obviously on this show, this is our 3rd episode, and we've done preseason episodes too, and we are preaching, what are the things you should think about, and it always comes up, I swear we're talking about it every 30 seconds on the show, EV,
Yep.
expected value, and there's correlation between pick popularity and expected value.
Yeah.
And so we know that there are going to be weeks in this contest where you eat the chalk because it's
Okay.
gonna preserve your future value, even though it is not, quote, unquote, "a good EV play." So, my question to you is this one of those weeks where you sort of punt EV for a different day? You accept low future value, you accept future
Uh-huh.
value savings? And you say, "Hey, this is just gonna be a week where I'm sorta with the chalk, and we're gonna get through, and we're gonna pick our spots. We got a lot of weeks upcoming. We're gonna get weird a little bit later on when it makes sense." Is that sort of an approach, that you would take?
That is one approach. I think you have to decide what you wanna do in Seattle, but then we've kinda talked about it. There is definitely a case to take Seattle at fairly low EV, and when I say low EV, I mean, like, 0.90. Let me see where our number is when we project them at 38%, and we're in the upper 30s,
Or 9-1?
0.91, right? So there that so to put that in perspective and cut through the math, basically it means you're cutting your chances by almost 10%. In the current week. Like, you don't have pot odds on your side. Like, because of the risk that you do lose that entry, which is included in that number, uh, and because you're gonna be on a popular team, your chances of, like, getting a windfall in your value of your entry just this week is minimized. That's not like a terrible EV relative to, say, picking a straight up pick 'em game, even at low ownership. Because if you look down our list, what's the line on, like, New England plus 1.5? Their EV is 0.71. That's like a 30% hit, right? You don't wanna do that. And I think, by the way, we've weeded out a lot of the, underdog and toss up and kind of like wild card pickers that pick a random team, with the way the first 2 weeks have gone, because those are the entries that have gotten knocked out at a higher rate.
Yep.
Um, but those picks are worse than taking Seattle, right? I think the question is, where do you want to take your shot? What do your entries look like? I think you can afford to do that more if you started, say, Arizona, Dallas, Pittsburgh. Like, if you took Cincinnati week 1 and survived that one, and now Joe Burrow's hurt, well, you just fell into an entry that's probably more valuable because there are fewer spots where the Bengals are going to come up. So you just, unbeknownst to all of us in week 1, that entry is now more valuable. So if you have an entry like that Cincinnati, Dallas, Cincinnati, Arizona, those kind of teams that are outside our top 15, maybe you can reject Seattle, right? If you've taken Baltimore last week and maybe you took Denver in week 1, I I might eat the chalk and say my best way back into this contest and having a valuable entry is to go ahead and see if Seattle gets through. EV be damned a little bit.
Yeah, I think that's a great explanation, and one of the reasons, like we've briefly spoken about alternative picks here, off of Buffalo and Seattle, but let's go through a couple here.
Yeah.
They all have pretty high future value, and that's why Seattle's gonna have the pull that they have in Circa Survivor because you don't really want to burn these teams. You don't want to necessarily burn the Bills. Not that they're a bad play, just for all that future value they have. Same with the Green Bay Packers at the Cleveland Browns, 7.5 point favorite. Could have very, I want to say moderate projected pick popularity. They have high future value. You have the Tampa Bay Bucks at home against the Jets. That line is around 7 points as of Wednesday night. But they have a lot of future value because they get the Saints and the Panthers twice. You're going to kind of want to deploy them in those spots. Similar with Atlanta at Carolina, 5.5 point favorite. They're going to get Carolina at home again later in the year. They're going to play the Saints twice again. So they have a lot of future value, I believe, from week 11 on, which could be key. Then you have the Chiefs, and we know they have future value. They're on the road Sunday night at the New York Giants, 6 point favorite. But that future value plus the wrinkle of they play on Christmas, right?
Yep.
It's the Christmas one, not the Thanksgiving. But yeah, just that one Christmas one. They're projected to be a favorite in that game, I believe, at Dallas.
The Chiefs are at Dallas on Thanksgiving. They play at home against Denver on Christmas, but they play
That's
on
right.
both.
They
And they're the
are on both.
projected
Okay.
favorite on both right now. Like, we would have them as the favorite at home against Denver, and we would have them as the road favorite, not probably by about a field goal right now.
Yeah.
But there's question marks there, like, where's that offense going? How healthy are they? They get Rashee Rice back. I think there's a potential they're a better pick than they are relatively now. And
So
so all those teams definitely have, to various degrees, value, and you're gonna wanna use them throughout this contest.
yeah, and if you want to go a little more contrarian, maybe if you have multiple entries, you have the Colts at Tennessee, 4 point favorite. Um, and their future value is pretty low. That's partially due to we really don't know what the Colts are right now. So, if they turn out to be good, maybe they have a little better future value. But how do you feel about the Colts? I really want to broach that conversation
Yeah,
because
I'm
some
I'm con
people will be looking at them because they sort of answer that question of if you really want to pivot off Seattle.
yeah, they are the one team that I think is reasonable and in play. Because because we have a team like the Bills who are over 85% or 80 something percent to win this week. Um, because we have so many other teams that are at 75% or better, I don't think you want to be picking like a 55%, right? So you don't need you probably don't want to go that low. You can find that any week. Let's be honest. Like, if that's your standard, you can find that at any point in this contest. So you don't have to like shy away and do that now. Um, the Colts are the one team over 60% that also has low future value, slightly higher than Seattle. There are a few spots that if this Colts team kind of like, because right now we think they're okay, but they're buoyed by drawing the Dolphins, and they're still, I think, power rated closer to maybe slightly below average or around average. If they're okay, they'll bubble up in some other weeks. Some week 8 against Tennessee is their top one on ours, but they also get the Raiders at home in 2 weeks from now on that key week 5 that I mentioned. Um, but Indianapolis is in play as the kind of counter to Seattle's high popularity at higher risk. Because they are at higher risk, their total advancement odds aren't quite as high, but they do serve the similar purpose of saving future value. And so if you want to be more contrarian with your future value savings, I think you go to the Colts. We're currently projecting them at 4%. Maybe that should be a tick higher because some people will tend toward that.
Sure.
But that's the one. I think some people will think Atlanta is the contrarian play at lower future value. We've now got them up even with Washington and closer to a lot of other teams because I think people maybe don't realize Atlanta's schedule and that they have several favorable spots. I think we have them with 3 where they're at 73% above now, and this is Atlanta team continues to trend up, you're gonna see a few more pop up. And so, um, Atlanta's going to be in play like 4 times this year in the future. So they aren't really that future value, "Oh, I gotta use them now or lose them." So I don't know that they're like the true counter to Seattle as a straight future value savings.
Yeah, and I wanna run something by you because you said something last week that was really eye-opening for me, and I hope it was for the listeners too, that we can't predict the future. We can't predict what things are gonna look like week 10 and beyond or even before that. I mean, look at what just happened last week with all these quarterback injuries, um, kind of really threw off the win odds and everything, and we don't claim to. We're just kinda putting out these projections on our season planner tool, so you could think about things properly, and you can see when teams have spike in win odds, and which teams sort of correlate together on those same weeks. So, you said last week, think of it as like a 2v2 trade.
Yep.
So if you want to fade Seattle today and say, or this week, and I want to say, I want to get the Packers favored by more than a touchdown at Cleveland at low popularity as a quasi good EV move. Like,
Right.
I don't know if the Packers are gonna be a much higher EV play in the future. We can talk about that, as well, but for the sake of this conversation, I wanna say, okay, so the spike weeks for the Packers on our season grid, week 9, they are 83% win odds against Carolina, or if you go down, you have week 14, 78% against Chicago. So I say if I take the Packers now.
Well, and week 6, by the way, I'll point that out
Yep.
because that's a week without any bigger favorites projected. So they are actually our number 1 at 75%. Now, because of the Burrow injury, that's one that's popped up. That number could obviously fluctuate. We don't know what the Bengals will be, I think, fully, but that's also a spot that now bubbles up. That's probably one of Green Bay's actually higher relative spots because they are number 1.
Alright. So that is definitely part of the conversation I want to have.
Yep.
But if I say, let's say I wanna use Pittsburgh that week
Yep.
or one of these other teams.
Yep.
So I can say I have that week covered from a planning standpoint.
Yep.
And then week 9, I have not used the Rams yet on this entry, this fictitious entry I have, right?
Mhm.
So week 9, I can use, LA Rams against the New Orleans Saints.
Yep.
So that's one of Green Bay's other spike weeks. And then week 14, I can use the Tampa Bay Bucks instead of the Packers against Chicago. So I'm kind of making that trade where, say, I can do week 9, Green Bay now, LA Rams week 9, or Seattle now and Green Bay week 9, plus the added leverage of Green Bay as like,
Yeah.
say, if you're doing a trade and that's the cash compensation because we don't really know what's going to materialize into. Um, so if you kind of look at it that way, do the Packers make a little more sense as an EV play, or do you want to hold them as a potential um, it's going to safeguard against some of the risk if these plays don't work out or an EV
Yeah.
hammer later.
I think you can make that argument. You kinda laid out a specific path, right? That path just becomes a little more fragile, right? What if something happens to Tampa Bay? Or what if that pick is no longer an option or something, right? And so, but I think that's a way to think about it for sure. And like you said, we can't guarantee the future. We're very I would equate us it's like a coach having to make decisions in a football game. We're in the first quarter right now. You gotta decide what you're gonna do on 4th and 1 at the opponent's 20, right? 4th and inches. You don't know how the game's going to play out, but you have to take into account what you know about your team, the other team, and the game situation and what's expected. and make the best decision you can. And that's what we do each week. And eventually we get in the second quarter and hopefully the third quarter if you advance far enough. And every week you reevaluate and you make the decision based on what you know at that time. So our season planner is just like kind of laying out some paths, but those numbers will change. Injuries will happen. But I disagree with people who are like, don't try to plan because of that. No, you plan and then you readjust and you plan again and you make the best decisions you can with the information you have at the time the decision is required to be made. We don't have to make it today. We have to make it on Saturday, unless you want the Bills, in which case you got to put it on Thursday night. And so make the best decisions you can on each entry at the time you have to make it. And so you laid out a Packers argument. I think you could do that. You also talk 2v2, right? If you don't want to take Seattle now, well, are you taking Pittsburgh against Cleveland? What spot do you prefer? Because you're almost going to have to eat the chalk at some point in this contest, right? At some point. Which one do you like? Pittsburgh versus Cleveland in week 6?
Yep.
Do you like Houston versus, let me find, or do you like Indy versus Tennessee in week 8? Like you do that, you can say Baltimore, Buffalo, Philadelphia, and Atlanta. Do you like Houston in one? I'm trying to find it. It might be 10 or 11. Do you like Houston? Maybe I think it's 14. Sorry, we're doing this live and week 16, right?
16.
Versus the Raiders.
Yeah.
Houston, 69%. But that number may be 73 by then. Do you like Houston against the Raiders in week 16?
So you're talking about what we previously outlined with these 13 teams we like and we know we're going to use. We got to find 7 more. If you cross Seattle off that list, you got 7 others and Seattle's not one of them. If you use Seattle this week, you have 6 others from that list. And so you're trying to make up where are you going to find that? And what you're saying is week 6, Pittsburgh against Cleveland, you're going to be sitting on the same dilemma as you are with Seattle right now.
Yep.
So
I think maybe not quite as popular, but also maybe not quite as safe, right? I think that game has more downside risk too. So and you don't have to commit to I'm picking these 6 instead of Seattle. Just take a look at it. Have an idea what your alternatives might be to know where your comfort level is and which decisions you like. If you're rejecting the chalk this week, know what that means you're going to have to do on this entry and be fine with it. You can be a complete contrarian player and get a bunch of 63%, which is like 4 points, 3.5 point favorites. Your risk of getting through the entire season lowers a little bit, but you get off of the popular picks. You can find those all the time. That means you're taking things like Carolina in week 10 at home against the Saints, the Bears at home against the Giants in week 10, right? Those are the kind of picks that are going to be less popular and more contrarian of these future value savings, but they're also going to be riskier. And you got to be, if you want to play that contrarian game, acknowledge it now. Like go be like, okay, yeah, that's how I want to play this out. And I'm going to stay off Seattle as a result. Because those are the things you got to think about. What is your preference? That ultimately, I think this forces this more so than Dallas last week. I think Seattle is such a lightning rod spot. You aren't going to find many others that are going to be over 75% down that low in future value. It's just kind of a deal with this schedule. Like the way Seattle's schedule sets up, they play a tough NFC West. They play, a bunch of teams. They play at Jacksonville. They play at Tennessee. So they catch those 2 on the road. They get Houston and Indy at home. None of those are like terrible teams, especially the ones they get at home. They play Minnesota. They play, San Francisco twice. They play at Washington. So the schedule is not like, it doesn't set up other than this spot. And that's kind of a rarity, right? We rarely have like, oh, this is their one spot that is such a clear-cut spot. So I know we've gone on and on, but I think it really comes down to what you want, how you want to play this contest, and whether you prefer the contrarian, whether you're willing to take your shot on Pittsburgh and teams like that in other weeks, because I don't think you can reject the chalk for 7 different weeks and get through this contest at high odds.
Yeah. And that's a great point, and I think we'll wrap it there. As Jason said earlier in the episode, go ahead, give us a like and subscribe, or comment what you're thinking this week when it comes to either your Circa Survivor picks or overall NFL Survivor picks. And you can head over to poolgenius.com, click the Circa Survivor tab to look at all these tools we've been talking about: season planner tool, data grid, in Jason's column. I'm going to link that in the description below. So that's going to be it for our Circus Survivor Week 3 strategy show. Good luck in your entries.